Keith Richards, one of the most legendary names in the history of rock and roll, the guitarist, songwriter, and eternal spirit of the Rolling Stones. For over 6 decades, he's been the beating heart of one of the greatest bands the world has ever known. But Keith isn't just famous for his riffs and his swagger. He's also famous for something else, his mouth. He never filters what he says. He doesn't care if you're a superstar, a legend, or a billionaire. If he doesn't like your music, he'll tell you straight to your face. And that's what makes him fascinating. Today, we're diving deep into something wild, the 7 bands Keith Richards hated the most. We're going behind the scenes, into his raw opinions, brutal honesty, and sometimes hilarious insults. Because when Keith dislikes someone's music, he really means it. To him, music isn't just sound, it's soul. It's sweat, it's danger, it's imperfection. And he can't stand when artists forget that. So buckle up, because we're going on a ride through decades of rock history, rivalries, egos, and brutally honest truths. Let's find out who made Keith roll his eyes, and why he didn't care if the whole world disagreed with him. Let's start with Metallica. The kings of heavy metal, loud, thunderous, aggressive, and masters of technical perfection. They owned the 1980s and 1990s with albums like Master of Puppets, Ride the Lightning, and the Black Album. They packed stadiums, broke records, and inspired millions. But when someone asked Keith Richards what he thought of Metallica, he didn't hold back. He said, "Millions are in love with Metallica and Black Sabbath. I just thought they were great jokes." That's Keith being Keith, casually throwing verbal grenades. He even added, "If Metallica got inspired by me, then I fucked up." To Keith, Metallica represented everything wrong with modern rock. He thought their sound was too polished, too aggressive, and too far removed from the bluesy heart of rock and roll. He saw heavy metal as noise without soul, a mechanical wall of sound that missed the emotion of the blues. For him, it wasn't about how fast you could play, it was about what you felt when you played. Keith grew up worshipping Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, and Howlin' Wolf. Those were his gods. That's the music that shaped the Rolling Stones. And when he looked at Metallica, he saw no connection to that lineage, no swing, no groove, no roots. To him, it was all fire and fury, but no feeling. Still, there's something ironic here. Metallica have openly said they were inspired by Keith and the Stones, especially their rebellious energy. They admired Keith's attitude, his outlaw image, and his refusal to play by the rules. But Keith didn't care. He never wanted followers, he wanted truth. And if your music didn't have it, he'd call it out. Next up, Led Zeppelin. They were gods in the 1970s, the band that defined what epic rock meant. Jimmy Page's guitars, Robert Plant's voice, John Bonham's drums, they were untouchable. Their concerts were legendary, their sound was thunderous, and their legacy immortal. But not to Keith Richards. He once said, "I love Jimmy Page, but as a band, no." And when someone asked what he thought of Led Zeppelin's music, he said it felt a little hollow. He even complained that Robert Plant's voice gets on my nerves. To Keith, Zeppelin was all thunder and no soul. Too big, too dramatic, too overproduced. He liked music with dirt under its fingernails, not music that sounded like it came from Mount Olympus. He believed rock should groove, not explode. There's also a history behind that rivalry. In the late 1960s, when Zeppelin was rising, they were constantly compared to the Stones. Both were British, both were blues-based, and both had massive egos. But where the Stones leaned into rhythm and attitude, Zeppelin leaned into myth and muscle. Keith once joked that Zeppelin's songs sounded like a bunch of bombastic noise with a banshee on vocals. Ouch. Still, even with that, Keith respected Jimmy Page as a guitarist. He just thought the band lost the spirit somewhere along the way, too much power, not enough pulse. Now we move to Elton John. A pop genius, piano virtuoso, hitmaker, and one of the biggest stars of all time. But to Keith Richards? He was an old bitch. Yes, Keith actually said that. He also once mocked Elton's songwriting, saying, "His writing is limited to songs about dead blondes." That was harsh, even by Keith's standards. But that's how he saw it. He thought Elton's music was too soft, too clean, too commercial. Keith wanted grit, the crackle of an amp, the imperfections of live sound. Elton gave him glitter, sequins, and pop polish. And while Elton was topping charts with songs like Tiny Dancer and Rocketman, Keith was still deep in the mud of blues, playing from the gut. It wasn't personal, it was philosophical. Keith didn't believe in pop perfection. He believed in rock conviction, and Elton, in his eyes, represented everything that rock had lost when it went mainstream. But even Elton had a comeback. He once called Keith a monkey with arthritis and said the Stones had become boring. Two legends, two giant egos, and one endless feud, the stuff of rock and roll history. Then came David Bowie. Now, Bowie was no ordinary artist. He reinvented himself with every decade. Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, the Berlin Years. He was a master of change. A visionary who blurred the lines between art, gender, and music. But Keith Richards didn't buy it. He once said, "It's all pose. It's all fucking posing. It's nothing to do with music." And when asked if he liked Bowie's songs, Keith admitted, "I like changes." That's about it. To him, Bowie's art was too theatrical, too controlled. He saw it as fashion, not feeling. Keith respected artists who bled into their work, who played from pain, not from concept. He thought Bowie's brilliance came with too much planning, too much costume, and not enough chaos. Yet, years later, when Bowie passed away, Keith spoke warmly of him. He called him a true original and a great friend. That's the contradiction that makes Keith fascinating. He can hate your music and still love your soul. Next, Oasis. The 1990s Britpop explosion. Noel and Liam Gallagher, loud, arrogant, and endlessly confident. They called themselves the greatest band in the world, and when asked about the Rolling Stones, they said they were old farts still playing pubs. Keith Richards didn't let that slide. He once said, "Who's the bigger cunt, your singer or mine?" That was his way of saying, "Welcome to the big leagues." He saw Oasis as kids playing dress up. They had the swagger, but not the substance. They copied the Stones' attitude but missed the heart. To Keith, they were parroting rock history, not making it. He believed real rock wasn't about pretending, it was about living it. And he thought Oasis were just actors in leather jackets. Now, let's talk about Bob Dylan and the band. Yes, even Bob Dylan, the poet of rock, wasn't immune to Keith's tongue. Keith once said, "Bob's a nasty little bugger." Keith laughed and said, "You're right there, Bob." But the truth is, there was mutual respect wrapped in rivalry. Keith admired Dylan's lyrics but thought he took himself too seriously. He said Dylan's shows with the band were too stiff, they play note for note. There's no life. Keith couldn't stand that kind of precision. He thrived on imperfection, on music that breathed, stumbled, and felt human. To him, Dylan's world was poetry, his was pulse. And finally, the Beatles. The Giants. The greatest band of all time. The group that changed everything. But Keith Richards never bowed to anyone, not even them. He once called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band a mishmash of rubbish. He said, "There's not a lot of roots in that music." He even mocked them for quitting live shows, saying, "They stopped touring in '66. They were done already." That's pure Stones versus Beatles rivalry. Two bands that defined an era, one clean, clever, and charming, the other dangerous, dirty, and raw. The Beatles were pop perfection. The Stones were chaos you couldn't control. But Keith's criticism wasn't all hate. He once said, "I loved them when they were a band. I didn't like what came after." What he meant was, he missed the raw, hungry Beatles of Hamburg, not the psychedelic studio wizards they became. To him, Twist and Shout had more soul than Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. After hearing all this, you might think Keith Richards is just grumpy or jealous. But there's something deeper here. Keith doesn't just play music, he protects it. His hatred often comes from love, a love for authenticity, for imperfection, for the heartbeat of rock. He hates anything fake, polished, or overthought. He believes rock and roll should sound like it's about to fall apart, but somehow never does. It should make you feel something real, not just impress you with perfection. Maybe he's old school. Maybe he's harsh. But that's Keith. The man who survived every decade, every drug, every disaster, and still stood tall with a guitar in his hands and fire in his soul. Some might say he's unfair. After all, Metallica, Zeppelin, and the Beatles changed history. But Keith never cared about trends or trophies. He cared about truth. He said what others wouldn't dare to say. And that's exactly why he's still the soul of rock and roll. So now I'll ask you, do you agree with Keith Richards? Do you think those bands lost their roots? Or do you think Keith just can't let go of the past? Tell me what you think in the comments. Make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.